Hey, welcome to Lake Oconee Church Online on this Memorial Day weekend. It's hard to believe that just 1 year ago this month, this was still a gravel parking lot, and we had just begun pushing up dirt as we launched our Phase 2 initiative, committed to loving the Lake Country more. And during that year, so much has happened. Not only have we completed construction, but we've also held age-specific events for every life stage. And we've hosted more than 1,500 people for our Easter services. We've partnered with organizations throughout our community. And we've held weekly services with extraordinary environments for babies and preschoolers, elementary kids, middle and high school students, adults, and the guests that you have been inviting. And so many of you have helped that happen because you have volunteered on a serve team. So this weekend, as a gift back to you, we're not holding services in person over the Memorial Day Sunday. But instead, our hope is that that creates space for you to spend time with family and friends, remembering those who have given their lives for our freedoms.
So most of us don't particularly like change.
We don't like change. We like what we know. We like what we're familiar with. We like what's comfortable. We like what we've chosen in the past, and we don't want to have to choose again. Most of us don't like change. And as I've been able to get a little more discerning about myself, what I've found is that specifically on my weekend days, I don't particularly like change. I like what I'm looking forward to, what it is that I've planned. And in fact, I so much don't like change that even if I know I'm going to have to do something I don't want to do, once I wrap my mind around it, I'm disappointed if we don't do that thing. How crazy is that? But like most of us, we just don't like change. We like the plan. We like what we're familiar with. But we live in a world that is constantly changing. It's full of change. And in fact, researchers have identified that culture changes constantly. And sometimes we, as people, we don't really even see it. And then at other times, it feels like it's changed so dramatically, we don't know how on earth we got here. But what researchers have found is that culture changes a lot like an S-curve. That it slows down at points as we go through the turns, and then it accelerates in the straightaways. And over the last couple of years, it has certainly felt like culture has accelerated through the straightaways of the 2020s. And since beginning those 2020s, culture has changed dramatically. Think about this for just a second. Remote work is now a value over in-person daily commutes to wherever it is that we're going. Telehealth is familiar to most of us as opposed to in-person appointments. Of necessity, there is a great deal of more attention that is given to mental health, not just physical health. People nowadays are far less trusting of authority figures, in part because of atrocities like what we've seen unfold coming out of Memphis over just this past week. People are far less authentic on social media, and yet they depend on it more and more for human connection and for information. Since 2020, we all lean way more in to streaming services than to theaters. And every single one of us can use the word supply chain in a sentence. That wasn't a thing. I've been amused by the art of Irina Block. You can find her on most social media channels, but on Instagram, she has begun using comics to illustrate the difference of where we are now compared to where we were at the beginning of the decade. And here's just one of those comics. Here was our budget before COVID. And here is our budget after COVID. 3 things: Amazon, utilities, and groceries. It seems like the world has changed so dramatically, and this is just a humorous way of looking at it. Culture changes relentlessly. And for those of us who are attending the Lake Oconee campus, we know that last weekend we celebrated something that happened 10 years ago this month. The launch of our very first service of Lake Oconee Church. So we celebrated our 10th anniversary last week. And those who are joining us at our Houston campus, you know that the church there has gone on for a long while as well. So in a rapidly changing world, where culture is changing dramatically, we have to occasionally ask the question, is our church still needed? is our church still needed? Is it necessary? Now, that may seem like an odd question, and for those of you who are joining us today as our guests, I'm so glad that you're along for this conversation with us. And I recognize how weird a question that could seem as you're sitting here. But I'm so glad that you're a part of this conversation as we begin to discuss it. Because for many of us, we believe that the local church isn't just a gathering of people who somehow all believe the same thing. And it's not just a collection of pupils trying to see how very much we can learn. But instead, we believe that Jesus launched the church as his movement that would ultimately change the world. So the church is a collection of Jesus followers who accept him as their forgiver and their leader. And their gathering is intended to illustrate the heart of our Heavenly Father through how we live a life of love toward him and toward others. But people are different. Culture is different. And the world is different than it has ever been before. And for a growing number of people in our communities, and maybe even in your friend and family base, religion is no longer cultural. And faith is no longer assumed, and church attendance is no longer automatic. In fact, many people that you know likely have a bad church experience or no church experience at all. And for those of us with kids, if we're creating the same religious routines that were created for us and only had nominal impact when we went off to school, they have even lesser impact on our children today. In fact, Greg Smith, he's a researcher at the Pew Research Center, he said in a very recent study, the secularizing trends that have been evident for a long time show no sign of slowing, and certainly no sign of reversing. So it begs the question, in a culture that this is the research, is our church still necessary? But interestingly, we have said all along that our intention is to create a different kind of church. And by different kind, we don't mean that sometimes we have a preacher who's on a screen or, hey, we've got a really cool band. That's not what makes the difference that we're talking about. Instead, by different, we mean that we aim to create a church where even our friends who don't like church, that they might love to attend because they find it helpful and maybe even engaging. By different, we mean that we're creating a church for all people, not just church people. We're creating a place where you can belong before you fully believe. Create a place where we're purposefully not dialing back the grace, and we're intentionally not dumbing down the truth. A place where growing faith is evidenced by how we live, not just what we know. A place where our actions and our reactions are guided by loving God and others, following Jesus, rather than a policy or our party. And a different kind of church like that is incredibly necessary in this world, in this culture, in this decade. A church like that, a different kind of church like that, can be extremely pivotal in an extremely secularizing world. But there is a timeless tendency that can impede us from reaching that goal. And this timeless tendency, it is unfortunately true of me, and it's true of you. But thankfully, it was addressed by Jesus as he launched his closest followers for the very first time. And we find this conversation recorded by Matthew. Now, Matthew was one of the followers of Jesus. He was a tax collector, and he was despised by his own people. He was a cheat by all common standards, and yet he chose to begin to follow Jesus as one of his inner circle. And as he began to follow Jesus, eventually, he put together a biography of Jesus' life, documenting the things that he had seen and heard alongside Jesus. And in the 10th chapter of his documentary, we call it the Book of Matthew. It's one of the Gospels. We have 4 of these documentaries. He says this: "These are the names of the 12 apostles. These are the ones who were closest to Jesus in his core group, his small group. If you think of the people he poured the most of his energy into. First, Simon, who's called Peter, and his brother Andrew. James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John. Go ahead. Philip and Bartholomew. Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector. James, the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon, the zealot, and Judas Iscariot." And Matthew includes who ultimately betrayed him, if you were wondering if that was the same guy. You see, as Matthew puts together this list, he begins to paint this picture of fishermen and a tax collector and a zealot, a religious political fanatic, all rolled into this mix of people. This was quite a wild bunch, outcast from everyday society, and yet the ones that Jesus said, "I want to pour my life into you because I believe that you can continue this mission and this message." Matthew continues, and he said, "These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions." So if you can get the image of what's happening, Jesus has kind of centered his efforts around the Sea of Galilee. And he is traveling from community to community around this lake. And as he's traveling around this lake, sometimes he goes directly by boat, sometimes he walks. But as he goes around, he is preaching essentially the Sermon on the Mount, if that's a familiar phrase. Matthew records it a few chapters earlier. And it seems that over and over, Jesus would communicate some of these basic truths to the people who would come and listen. And they came in droves. And Jesus said, "I'm doing this area here. So I want to expand the influence of this message. So I'm going to send you, my closest 12, and you're going to go and carry this out in the next layer of this country." Jesus said, so he sends them out. Go back one if you would, please. He sends them with the following instructions. "Do not go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel." Jesus' desire at this point, it's still very early in his ministry. He said, "I want to reach out to the Jewish people first and foremost. As you go, proclaim this message," he says. "The kingdom of heaven has come near." This idea that the kingdom of heaven has come near, if you think back just a few weeks to what we celebrated at Christmas time, this idea is what the angels announced. It's what the shepherds celebrated. It's what Mary and Joseph marveled about. Emmanuel, God with us. God has drawn near in Jesus. And Jesus says, I want you to go and carry this message that the kingdom of heaven is near to you. But then he gives them some parameters. And he says, do not get any gold or silver or copper to take with you in your belts. You don't need to conduct a fundraising effort. No bag for the journey or extra shirt or sandals or staff. There's no uniform for this. For the worker is worthy of his keep. And whatever town or village you may enter, search there for some worthy person and stay at their house until you leave. Find somebody who will take you in and stay there until you finish telling this community about my message. But, Jesus says, be on your guard. Can you imagine being one of Jesus' closest followers in that moment? You're excited. You get to carry this incredible message. God is drawn near. You've seen crowds of people follow Jesus, and you're excited thinking they're going to follow me too. This is going to be awesome. But be on your guard, okay? You will be handed over to the local councils and be flogged in the synagogues. On my account, you will be brought before the governors and kings as witnesses to them and ultimately to the Gentiles, and you will be hated by everyone because of me. Now, these men who had begun to follow Jesus, they didn't know him all that well. This was fairly early on in the process, and so they're watching and they're listening. But if it was me, and maybe if it was you, we'd be sitting in that moment going, now wait a second. You're Jesus, and I think you're pretty awesome, and if the kingdom of heaven is near, then you've got a lot of influence here. So if it's Jesus, I'm sort of opting for the ease and the comfort and the convenience, because surely the one sent from God, like he can make that happen, right? But Jesus, because he loved them so much, he wanted to let them know that it wasn't going to be easy and simple and comfortable. So what he was saying ultimately was prepare for pushback and persevere through the problems. It's coming. It's gonna be there. You're gonna experience it. Prepare for the pushback and persevere through the problems. Now, Jesus knew that taking a step to follow him, in some ways that was easy. But keeping step with him daily along the way, that's difficult. And there is a timeless tendency in all of us to desire the effortless, the easy, and the comfortable. But as Jesus looked at his closest followers, he reasoned with them this way. And he said, the student is not above the teacher, nor a servant above his master. It's enough for the student to be like their teacher and a servant to be like their masters. And if the head of the house has been called Beelzebub, how much more the members of his household? Now, as Jesus says this, he had just recently been called a devil by the religious rulers of that day. And so for the disciples, they understood very well. He was saying, if they've called me a devil, do you think you're going to get off easy? But think about what Jesus went through. It was anything but easy and comfortable and simple. Because Jesus left the throne of heaven
to come down to earth, be born as a baby, obey sinful Mary and Joseph, be constantly misunderstood, be progressively hated by society, and ultimately to be crucified to pay my sin debt and yours and the people we love and know and care about. Jesus gave up a lot for us. But sometimes we struggle through the simplest things as we peer out the window to see what the weather is, to decide whether or not we might actually come and join in a group of people to celebrate and to sing his praises. The writer of Hebrews understood that tendency in all of us. It's timeless. It's everywhere. It's in all of us. And so the writer of Hebrews said it this way: let us run with perseverance. That's our word. The race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and the perfecter of our faith. Keep our eyes focused on him because he's already walked this journey. He's already weathered the difficulty. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Jesus prepared his closest followers. Look, this is going to be a difficult thing to persevere as a follower of me. The writer of Hebrews said the same thing. This is going to be a difficult thing because our timeless tendency is for easy and natural and convenient. But the challenge is prepare for pushback and persevere through the problems. And as the writer of Hebrews unpacks, on the other side of all of that was unspeakable joy as Jesus purchased our forgiveness for us and sat down with that mission complete at the right hand of God the Father. There's a win at the end of the push through. And as we investigate faith, perhaps that's what we focus on this morning. That's where we stop, recognizing that Jesus has done an amazing thing on our behalf and simply invites us to accept him as our forgiver and our leader. But let me, for just a minute, speak to those of us who a few minutes ago sang alongside James David, I will build my life upon his love. It's a firm foundation. And we said that and we meant that, and that's what we endeavor to do. I wonder what it would look like if Jesus were to gather us together and say, hey, it's 2023, and so you have a mission as you continue to guide and guard my movement into this decade. What would he prompt us to do and prepare and be aware of as we step forward? Maybe it isn't so much about what we bring with us and where we stay, what our accommodations will be. But I wonder if there might be some very practical principles that we could carry with us as we continue to be influential parts in the movement that Jesus launched so long ago. As I thought through this, I began to think, what would that look like? What would that sound like? And I don't know that this would be exactly what Jesus would say, but I wonder if any of these three might apply to us. The first, decide that your presence makes a difference. Decide that your presence makes a difference. At one time, it was natural, easy. In fact, most of us, we just did it automatically because somebody along the way did it with us, and then somebody before them did it with them. And we just show up because it was Sunday, and we just came to church. But for most of us, over this decade, we've begun to ask the question, is there any purpose in me jumping in and showing up on Sunday? It's inconvenient in some ways, but is it necessary? And if we have children, we come because there's an excitement about sending them down the hall, but maybe there's been that moment inside you that's gone, okay, I got a cup of coffee, but was there any other benefit to me being here today? Because I might have been able to watch this later or catch it some other time. And I would argue that your presence makes a difference. It makes a difference for you. In the same way that as we join together for things that we're excited about, when we come together to celebrate a birthday, or when we go out to eat with friends, there's something about locking arms with other people that are thinking the same way as us. And there's something about coming into a room and realizing you're not the only person that's striving to follow Jesus in your particular area. When you see them, it makes a difference to come alongside into the room and recognize that, hey, for me, there's something beneficial about being here. And if we're honest with ourselves, there's a good chance we're way more focused here than it is in some of the other ways that we might consume content. Way more engaged. Something happens when we're in the room alongside other people. But it's more than that. Something happens for our family when they're able to be poured into as well, when they're able to learn and grow, and now we have something to talk about as a group, as a collection of people who've been impacted that day. It also makes a difference for the person who's around you, across the room from you. I won't forget, it wasn't that long ago that somebody walked by me in the entryway and they said, I had no idea that they go here. I'll be back. That was the sequence of words. And I thought, good grief, their presence made a difference and they don't even know. Who knows who looks at us as we walk into this room and goes, because you're here, I'm comfortable coming back here. Your presence makes a difference. And your presence makes a difference for those that you serve. Because so many of us lean in and say, this is way more than just for me. It's for others around me. So I'm going to take a role. I'm going to lean into an opportunity. I'm going to inconvenience myself. I'm going to goof up my schedule. And I'm going to take a step. And as you serve, your presence makes a difference for those that you invest in. Your presence makes a difference, but it's something we have to decide. But our presence makes a difference is only one step that we might consider. For others of us, perhaps what we need to hear most is that we've got to determine whoever comes next comes first. Here's what I mean by that. Somebody at some point in time came together and said, you know what would be amazing? If we created a place where people could begin to investigate faith. And so they gave all of their energy and a lot of their time into helping create that. And ultimately, that began to become whatever it was that you stepped into, whatever it was that you experienced on your very first Sunday at one of our churches. Somebody way back then said, I don't know their name, I don't know what they look like, I don't know their story, but whoever comes next, for me, they're going to come first. I'm going to prioritize their experience. And along the way, many others of us have begun to do the same thing. We've begun to create for someone else what somebody once created for us, believing that whoever comes behind us should be our priority. Whoever comes next comes first. And whether we've been here for 5 years or 5 months or 5 minutes, whoever comes next, we could be a part of their story. And those of us who have been here the longest, sure, we're probably the most convinced, but we should also be the most convincing. But somewhere along the way, what happens is that those of us who are the youngest among us, we look at all the obligations and the weights and the burdens of our lives, and we say that I'm doing too much. There's no way that I could jump onto a team that helps to create something for those who are coming next. And those of us who have been around a little while, we begin to say, I've been doing this too long to keep doing this. So some of us are doing too much. Some of us think we've been around too long. And all of us could lean in and say, no matter what, whoever comes next comes first. And if I'm new here, there's an opportunity to belong before I even believe. I could jump in and help to create a welcoming experience for somebody just like somebody gave to me just a few weeks back. And for all of us who have breath, God has given us an opportunity to make a difference for those who are coming next. Whoever comes next comes first. But that's something that we have to predetermine. And maybe that's what we need to hear as we look at where culture is and where our opportunity is as a church. And thirdly, for those of us who are parents and grandparents, we have a unique obligation and opportunity, and it's complex and it's busy. And I would suggest that raising children now is more difficult than it has ever been. It has always been complex, but it is excruciatingly difficult right now for a whole variety of reasons. But what if we were able to design our parenting with purpose? Sometimes as a parent, I think we sort of end up in this moment where we want to be amazing parents, but for today, we just want to get to bedtime. If we can just survive long enough, then that's a win. And some days that is exactly the win. But there's been something that's happened over these past few years that as parents, we were expected, not really invited, we were just expected to suddenly become way more hands-on with our child's education. And as we became way more hands-on with our child's education, inadvertently, for some of us, we've become less hands-on with our child's faith. And in our attempts to somehow get a hold of this wild thing that we call life, we adopt a rather sporadic schedule. It's sometimes we drop them off and send them down the hall, and then we hope that they get taught, and we hope that we get taught, and our thought is, well, church should teach them, and church should teach us. But imagine for just a second what the impact would be of your college student being able to look back and see and remember the times that they helped you to build friendships with people who were new to you and not really engaged in church. But they helped you invest in those relationships because they cared about those people just like you do. If you've ever wondered why our churches don't have a Monday night this and a Thursday night that and fill in all the blanks here, it's to give us opportunity to honor our God together as we gather on Sundays. a chance to join in a small group sometime during the week, and many opportunities to do life alongside people who are just like us and haven't met their Heavenly Father yet. But imagine if you invite your children into the building of those relationships alongside you. What if our kids could look back and remember the times that they saw us serving? What if they could think of the times that they caught us giving generously? What if they could remember how they observed us prioritizing our small group connections? Because that's where we connected relationally and we grew spiritually. What we know to be true is that what happens at home is way, way, way more important than what happens at a church building somewhere. Because look at this. In your best year, you're probably going to get your kids to church for about 40 hours in that year. Because you're traveling, you're out on vacation, somebody's sick, and you stayed home. About 40 hours. That's how long the church has to invest in your children. But you, in your household, you have the potential of some 3,000 hours. These are the non-school, non-sleeping hours that you have with your child. Some 3,000 over the course of a year. That's a lot of hours. So what happens at home is way, way, way more important than what happens at church. And that's why we've made it our focus to partner with parents along the way. Our goal is to be partnering with you so that what happens at home is a reflection of your spiritual journey and the journey you want your child to embark on. Parenting right now is incredibly difficult, and if you aren't in a place to understand the why behind that, there are so many inputs, there are so many pressures, there are so many priorities that are put upon parents, and there are so many opportunities for kids to mess up at an incredibly early age because of what we all have access to. It is more complex now than ever. But for just a second, here's a little bit of what happens behind the scenes. When I say that we partner with parents, I would love for you to know that this is available to you. Here's what this looks like. From the earliest days, we offer something called Baby D. Maybe you've read something about it. But Baby D is a dedication opportunity where a family can come together and say, within our hearts and within those around us, our heart's desire is to see our child begin to track with God. And then every week we offer Wambaland, which is filled with small group leaders that get to know your children, know them by name, and get to know what they love and what makes them smile, so that every single day as they show up, they experience the love of our Heavenly Father, and it leaves a lasting impression for them. We provide discussion starters to you as a family so that you can begin to talk a little bit about what your child might be learning that month. But eventually they grow up super fast. And so they veer into this, I'm getting ready to go off to school. So as a preparation for that, we provide Kindergarten Kickstart, which gives them a glimpse of what it would look like to move from being that preschooler up into an elementary scenario. And from there, they're in Upstreet, where now they come sliding into a rug that's got a small group leader waiting for them. And that small group leader gets to know their name and spends time with them. And they see some of the same faces week after week after week. And they get discussion starters that you can look at and have a conversation around. What are you learning? What are you discovering about who God is? But also how that impacts your life as a second grader. From there, your child continues to grow and begins to ask questions about faith. And that's what Jumpstart is about. Jumpstart is this perfect opportunity for parents and kids together to explore faith. And ultimately, it will culminate with Baptism Bash, an incredibly huge party where children are baptized, serving as a mile marker that anchors in their hearts the decision that they made to follow Jesus. And then various kid venture activities that give them opportunities to invite friends and build deeper relationships with small group leaders. But ultimately, even elementary school ends. And so we offer transit test drive, a chance to transition up to middle school without it being weird and odd. And there are student Sundays where, again, group leaders are there, getting to know your guy or your girl and understanding what's going on in their world. And at the same time, your students have an opportunity to be engaged in student impact, serving in various ministry opportunities. And from time to time, throughout the year, we intentionally invite them to go away, to get away from the influences, to get away from what's familiar, so that just for a few minutes they can pause and maybe see clearly for the first time, God, what do you want for me and for my story? See, our goal in all of this is not to see how much can we teach, though what they learn is important. But our goal is to see them develop a faith of their own. And statistics show that as you pour into your child, and 5 other adult influences say the same thing that you're saying at home. 5 other adult influences know your child and encourage them to ground themselves in their faith. That's when faith sticks for the long haul. But what if we design our parenting with that as our purpose? You see, we have been entrusted with this movement, with the church, for a season of time until we hand it off. And the faith of the next generation hangs in the balance. And we, just like the first wave of followers of Jesus that he sent away, we have to prepare for pushback and persevere through the problems. It won't be easy. And Jesus doesn't give us direction about a bag or accommodations or what to do in the face of rejection. But these thoughts are equally practical. What if we decide and determine and design? What if we do this intentionally? And here's what I know about me and what I know about you as well. It's not that we don't want this to happen. It just doesn't happen spontaneously. Because, as we've said before, we rarely have the calendar or the confidence to do the big things that our Heavenly Father calls us to. From time to time, we've talked about what to do to find that space in the calendar. But next week, we're going to begin a new series that leans into the confidence that we need to lean into the opportunities that God puts in front of us. We're calling that series Imposter. What to say to the voices in your head. And we hear a lot of voices. So we're going to dive into that conversation next Sunday. And I hope that you'll plan to join us. Would you take a minute to pray with me and for a church that I believe is desperately, desperately needed, even in this decade? Dear Heavenly Father, it's humbling to think that you had to stop and tell your closest followers that their journey would be difficult and not easy. And yet it's just so incredibly practical because it's what we need. It's what we miss. It's what we avoid. And God, I pray that you would prompt us as we encounter those difficulties to persevere, to push through. And God, for each individual parent, God, I pray that you would support them, encourage them. Parenting is complicated. Bring them a glimmer of joy today, I pray. For all of us, as we weigh how engaged should we, could we, might we be in what you're doing in the world around us through the church that you've given to us. God, I pray that you would direct us. Just don't let us disengage because it's not easy. God, we love you. We thank you for Jesus. We thank you for the sacrifice that he went to on our behalf. May we learn from our teacher, I pray. It's in his name that we offer these things. Amen.